The birth of the goddess as author. New research results for Enħeduana. My name is Annette Skoll. I'm professor at Göttingen University, and I will lead you through these new research results. First, an overview. We will start with the hermeneutic approach, then continue with historical and cultural background, come to analysis and conclusions, and in the end you will get a summary of the results. First part, the hermeneutic approach, from emic to etic, meaning from original view to modern scientific view. The question of authorship is a modern scientific question. It is therefore a challenge to examine this phenomenon with a view to another time. Our hermeneutic approach must aim not to superimpose ancient concepts with contemporary modern ones. It must therefore start inductively, with a search for an original or emic perspective on ancient concepts that are close to our concept of authorship and literature, or at least as close as possible, depending on what we can find. This will lead us to a different view of the phenomenon and offer the chance to understand peculiarities and curiosities that are so quite alien to us in their own appropriate way. Since there are always many unspoken assumptions behind modern scientific conclusions, it is necessary to make the basics transparent. Therefore, we will first give some information about the historical and cultural background. Enħeduana is well attested as a priestess in the highest position. She is the first known high priestess of the city god of Ur. Several persons who define themselves as subordinates of the high priestess Enħeduana are attested by inscriptions on their cylinder seals. A votive inscription of Enħeduana from her time stems from the famous alabaster disc found in her priestly precinct, the sanctuary of Ningal in the temple of the city god of Ur. The front of her disc shows the priestess performing a ritual, surrounded by other ritual experts who are subordinate in rank. The evidence for the historicity of Enħeduana is undisputed in research. The situation in this respect is incomparably better than, for example, for the oldest Greek author, Homer. The situation is also much better than, for example, for one of the first female authors in Greece, Sappho. And there, it should at least be noted in passing, no research position can be found that hesitates to regard her as an author and to assume male ghostwriters. As for the cultural background, there is clear evidence that Mesopotamia is a culture with centuries of textual tradition. Copies of one and the same text are attested over long periods of time. Many texts attested in the 3rd millennium are found several hundred years later, especially in the Old Babylonian period, around 18th, 17th century BC. One such example is the Song of Praise to Nintu and Kesh, which you have dealt with in other episodes of this playlist. Fragments show that this hymn of praise was already known around 2600 BC. Many copies have been found some 800 to 900 years later from the Old Babylonian period. As the editor of the ancient version states, quote, "The Old Babylonian version is thus not a creation of Old Babylonian scribes using older material, but is a faithful reflection of a text that had already been fixed in the Sumerian literary tradition for centuries." Such a longue durée tradition is known for Mesopotamian texts in general and in the specific case of Enħeduana. The votive inscription on the alabaster disc indisputably dates to the 23rd century, and an ancient copy from the Old Babylonian period is known, which in this particular case proves a tradition of 600 to 700 years. This is exactly the time period that is at issue for the transmission of the song Ninmeshara. Another aspect in considering the function and date of Ninmeshara is the assessment of the general living conditions in ancient Mesopotamia, especially the most pressing needs of people there. In research literature, one finds the assumption that literary production and one's own importance and prestige would have been the greatest concerns of the people, at least of the scholars, and would have kept them on their toes. This sounds a bit anachronistic, as if the scholars of Western Europe today are being applied to ancient Mesopotamia. From years of reading the ancient sources, I would consider other needs as the most pressing for the ancients, including civil war, hunger, poverty, etc. But how can we know? One might think that we can only share our basic assumptions and have no chance to prove their validity. But there is a way to find answers that are supported by ancient sources. We can analyze sources such as ancient rituals and letters to find out. This gives a good picture of what is important in that culture. Rituals and letters mainly show concern for the basic needs of life, such as the threat of war, illness, or poverty. The sources show even more. One can see the ways in which people coped with these challenges. The answer is clear. The main means of coping with these challenges was interaction with the gods through rituals. In summary, our basic assumptions, based on our knowledge of the historical and cultural background of ancient Mesopotamia, are as follows. Enḥeduana is historically well attested. She lived in the 23rd century BC and was one of the active women, the elite women of high society. A long survival of texts, of ancient texts, is well attested, including an inscription of this Enḥeduana, and the pressing needs of her time were the most basic needs caused by the threat of civil war, disease, or poverty. With that in mind, we will now return to the new hermeneutic approach we have announced. We will use an in-depth analysis of the text and textual genre of the song Ninmeshara and see if there are ancient concepts that touch on our concept of authorship and literature, thus trying to get closer to an original perspective on these phenomena. With that in mind, we will now return to the new hermeneutic approach we have announced. We will use an in-depth analysis of the text and textual genre of Ninmeshara and see if there are ancient concepts that touch on our concept of authorship and literature, thus trying to get closer to an original perspective on these phenomena. Our textual analysis began by clarifying the ritual genre of Ninmeshara. This will be the first part. The text Ninmeshara uses three self-referential terms that denote its own genre in ancient perspective. It is a prayer, Sumerian arazu, a sacred song, serku, and tearful lamentation, ir, as in ir shema, traditional er shema. Thus, it is a cultic text. Note, by the way, that the term siskur is used only in the epilogue, so it is not taken into account for the analysis of the actual song. Then, from the words, let's have a look at the phrases. The text uses the phrase to recite your sacred song, in parallel to the phrase to recite your rituals. rituals are the focus of the song. And references to cultic actions in the song show that this song is conceived as a song embedded in a ritual. The mythical and historical narrative material woven into the text serves the purpose of the ritual text. It is not to be understood in analogy to narrative genres such as epics or anecdotes, nor as royal inscriptions or fictional royal letters. This becomes even clearer when one realizes that the text ends openly. I will come to this later. Close reading, Sphragis and ritual. That Enḥeduana is responsible for the creation of the text in šara is not part of an addendum to the text, but is woven into the text. This is significant in itself. It is not to be seen as an afterthought, but an integral part of the song. And even in the text itself, there is no simple Sphragis. What is a Sphragis? Sphragis is a Greek term. The meaning is sealing, and it is used to denote the declaration of authorship of an author. So in the text in šara itself, there is no simple Sphragis that would have the form, I, Enḥeduana, have created this song. But this is not there. Instead, the Sphragis in this text is more complex. It is through the combination of 3 statements, of which 2 would be enough, but there are actually 3, that a Sphragis comes into being here. 2 statements identifying the poetic speaker as the high priestess Enḥeduana are placed in the middle part of the song. Line 67. I am the high priestess, I am Enḥeduana. The name Enḥeduana meaning adornment of the sky god An. And line 81. Again, I am Enḥeduana, Sumerian Enḥeduanamen. At the end of the song, it ends with line 142. The same first-person speaker who speaks throughout the song states that she has created or born or intoned the song. Quote, since my heart was full, since it had become more than full for me, powerful mistress, I have given birth to it for you, or I have created it, or I have intoned it for you. The different tablets have different wording on them. How are these statements to be read from the perspective of antiquity? Are they to be taken as statements of authorship? To answer this question, we need to analyze the context in which they are embedded. To anticipate the result of the analysis right away, all 3 statements are embedded in ritual contexts. The first is a review of Enḥeduana as high priestess in Ur. Quote, of unfathomable heart, powerful woman of radiant heart, I will intone your rituals for you. Into my fateful sanctuary I had truly entered towards you, I the high priestess, I Enḥeduana. While I carried the ritual basket and intoned the cultic festive cheer, they offer the sacrifices for the dead, instead of the festive offerings in the basket and the accompanying jubilation, as if I myself had ceased to live there. The second passage describes how Enḥeduana performs rituals in her sanctuary and is abruptly interrupted by counter-rituals that threaten her with death. These rituals are meant to remove Enḥeduana from her office, and against it, she emphasizes once again that she is still the high priestess. quote, "I am Enḥeduana. I will say a prayer to you. My tearful lamentation or lamentation rituals, as if they were a libation of fine beer, I will now give free rein before you, radiant Inanna. Your judgment, I will say to you," meaning it is up to you to pass your judgment. This is about the present. It is about what Enḥeduana has to do as high priestess. She creates rituals and performs them. Since the situation is threatening, the rituals performed for Inanna are lamentations. But not only. The core of the rituals is Inanna's empowerment. She has to remember that she's the most powerful deity, that the judgment of what will happen rests with her, that she is the lady of all rituals, the šara, that she possesses all these rituals, especially the terrible warlike rituals that strike down all enemies. The third passage belonging to the Sphragis is about present and future. I have heaped up the coals, the purification rites are prepared here, meaning in the temple, for it, meaning for the song. The temple called sacred inn, is ready for you here. So now, for my sake, let no one calm your heart. Since my heart had become full, since it had become more than full for me, powerful mistress, I have borne this ritual song for you. Enḥeduana has prepared everything for the performance of the ritual. The ritual begins, as usual, with purification rites. The center of the ritual is the sacred song to the lady of all rituals, the šara. Enḥeduana has created and intoned the song. When the pressing problems will be solved and the civil war will be over, the song will become part of the regular cult, where the cult singers will repeat it regularly. This is a promise of further praise that will elevate the goddess. But for now, the wrath of Inanna must first find its target. The three Sphragis statements about Enḥeduana show her as an actor and author. This taken together. The three statements cover the different time levels. Past, Enḥeduana was high priestess in Ur, where they tried to wrest this office from her. Present, Enḥeduana is high priestess, now presumably in the city of Girsu, where she is now performing the present ritual. And future, Enḥeduana promises Inanna that this ritual will become part of Inanna's regular cult if Inanna acts in accordance with her own anger. A promise that Enḥeduana can keep if she remains high priestess. All three statements thus indicate and emphasize that Enḥeduana was, is, and will be high priestess. A long-term study of the central term of ancient Mesopotamian religion, which will be published soon, will show that this central term, the Sumerian word me, has to be understood and translated as ritual, rituals. This is very important for the understanding of šara. The main term of šara is me. The second word of the song is me. The main epithet of the goddess Inanna is built on this term, lady of all, or the uncountable me, lady of all the rituals. The term me is used more than 10 times in the song, and especially in the invocation, the first 8 lines of the song, where we find it 7 times. In the beginning of the song, Inanna is invoked as the most powerful goddess since she is in possession of all the rituals. Later on, the focus shifts to specific rituals that are most relevant to the current situation. And there, more specific wording than just rituals is used. The martial rituals, horrible for every enemy, as the myths woven into the song demonstrate clearly. The task of the song is made very clear in line 65. Mesu gamurabdu. I am going to recite your rituals to you. The core of this ritual invocation are lines 122 to 133, where the priestess forcefully evokes the power of Inanna's martial rituals, by which Inanna will destroy every enemy land and triumph everywhere, so that she is so powerful that even her father must do as she commands, meaning that he will even destroy his own city, Ur, according to her verdict. Rituals thus form the core of the ritual song Ninme Shara. Performative rituals are meant to change a situation for the better. For example, if someone is sick due to the power of demons, as one thinks in ancient Mesopotamia, a ritual against sickness asks the gods for help. The outcome of such a ritual is open. It depends on how the god will act. Ninme Shara is part of such a performative ritual. As the land is kind of sick due to the power of the enemies, the ritual asks Inanna for help. Here too, the outcome is open. In the song, this is made very clear. The final performative speech act at the very end of the song. Afterwards is only the epilogue, which is totally different from the song. The final performative speech act is: because your husband has been seized, because your protégé has been seized, as long as your rage about that is huge, nobody will calm your heart. This means act according to your anger. No one will try to stop you as long as the situation has not changed for the better. And even more precise is another line where Enḥeduana lets no doubt that she performs the whole ritual to make Inanna's anger erupt. It is formed as a prohibition. Quote, "The temple Eshdamku stands ready for you here. For my sake, nobody must cool your heart." No one is allowed to appease Inanna's anger until Inanna has acted out her anger on the enemies. The content, namely the open end of the ritual text, and its form, especially the way the words implore and urge Inanna, make it clear that the ritual refers to an acute historical situation. We come to the next part. Modern ethic conclusion. The priestess creates the ritual. If we ask ourselves, who might be able to perform such a ritual? The answer is only a priest or priestess. In this case, the situation is as dire as it can be, of utmost urgency and importance. Life and state are at stake. Who else should act in this situation if not the highest priestess herself? Up to here, the circumstantial evidence strongly suggests that Enḥeduana created the ritual song along with the ritual. But let us step back for a moment. This is the modern scientific view. It is not wrong, but it is only half right for the ancient world. So let us have a look on ancient perspectives on rituals. Rituals created by gods. This is not what 21st century AC people would expect. Foster, 1991, remarks on this, quote, "Whereas modern literary tradition stresses the individual's importance as a matrix of creative impulse, Mesopotamian artistic tradition tended rather to stress the outside source of the inspiration. The effort of composition is passed over lightly. The only hint is the artist's pride at the quality of his product." End quote. And Glasner, 2009, makes it even clearer how strange this may sound in our ears. I give you the original French citation and an English translation. Quote, "Lists have come down to us which mention authors' names, but these documents are hardly acceptable as such, because they mention, jumbled together, the names of divinities, creatures of legends, and historical figures." End quote. But this is precisely the view of the people of ancient Mesopotamia. Attempting to gain insight into the emic perspective is not only necessary to get a clear view of the case of Enḥeduana and the question of her authorship, but will also broaden our understanding of literature and authorship in ancient Mesopotamia in general. So let us look for the ancient perspective on authorship, and especially the question of Enḥeduana as author. The strangeness we see in this ancient concept of rituals created by gods has one general and one particular reason. The general problem is that our own worldview is usually a completely different one. The particular problem is more pragmatic. How can we imagine that ritual songs came into being if they were created by gods? Noticing the strangeness is the first step in the search for answers. In our hermeneutic search for emic perspectives, we look for more information about how the idea of gods creating sacred ritual songs worked for the people of ancient Mesopotamia. How could they have imagined it? In the case of very ancient ritual texts, it might be easy to imagine. These could be postulated as coming from the gods. But how could this be imagined in the case of Enḥeduana, where the ritual song contains many references to current life situations? To solve this problem, we must return to ancient ideas of the high priestess in Ur. We have found important information on this in the alabaster disc of Enḥeduana. Here, in this inscription, Enḥeduana bears the titles Ziru, sweetheart of Nana, and spouse of Nana. That means that she is actually identified with the goddess Ningal, the spouse of Nana. This does not mean that she is identical with the goddess in every aspect, that she is identical with the goddess as a whole, with all her aspects and powers. But she is identified as a manifestation of the goddess Ningal. This means that she is seen as one manifestation along others, as for example, the statue or the divine symbol or a star. Enḥeduana is seen as embodiment of Ningal. In particular, she is the mouthpiece of the goddess, as we can see in another line of Nin-me-shara, line 119. I have not revealed the decrees of Ningal to this man. Here, Enḥeduana actually acts as the mouthpiece of Ningal. So when the goddess is embodied in Enḥeduana, the goddess can speak through her. With this background knowledge, one can understand what is meant when the ritual song says that Enḥeduana created this ritual song. It turns out to be a powerful message. This message does not refer to Enħeduana as a human being, but to Enħeduana as goddess Ningal, who created this new ritual song. In fact, we find a comparable idea about another city goddess called Ninlil. Ninlil also creates, literally gives birth to rituals, as in the case of Enħeduana. By the way, it might be influenced by the wording of Ninmeshara. Quote, Mother Ninlil, the great mistress of your temple district Ki-Ura, the mistress who gave birth to the rituals. End quote. This is from a song of praise to the city of Nippur and the king Ishme-Dagan. The concept that it is the gods who create rituals and ritual texts provides the missing background to understand why the text says so forcefully that Enħeduana is really high priestess and that she has created this song. The point being emphasized here is the statement that she is still high priestess and therefore still a manifestation of the goddess Ningal, because that is exactly what is being denied by some of her contemporaries, influential ones. Let me quite briefly reflect on the historical implications that this status as a manifestation of the goddess Ningal has for Enħeduana and literally for her life. The new ruler in Ur, Lugal-ane, has denied Enħeduana the right to exercise her high priestly office. By the way, this and other information about Enħeduana's life stems all from the song Ninmeshara. Okay, Lugal-ane has even tried to deprive her of this high-ranking office through rituals. He has performed death rituals against Enħeduana. But after all, he obviously did not dare to kill Enħeduana. That sounds surprising. But it is not surprising when we keep in mind that she was considered a goddess. Lugal-ane could not be quite sure whether Enħeduana was still accepted by the gods as high priestess and thus as embodiment of the goddess Ningal. This is, I think, the reason why he only expelled her. The concept that Enħeduana as a manifestation of the goddess Ningal created the ritual and its song provides the answer to our question posed at the outset, the search for an approach to the emic concept of authorship. The answer is that the song Ninmeshara does not speak of the ability to create the ritual song, but of the right to create it. The moot question for Enħeduana and her time is not whether she is able to communicate with the gods, but whether she is still able to embody the goddess Ningal. So it is not a question of authorship, but of divinity. And authorship results from divinity. We come to the conclusion from the perspective of ancient Mesopotamia. In summary, we can conclude that Enħeduana's Sphragis, the 3 passages that identify the speaker as the creator of the ritual song, are not to be found in the context of authorship, but in the context of ritual. And they do not only emphasize that Enħeduana is high priestess, but they emphasize that Enħeduana is a manifestation of the goddess Ningal. Modern ideas and concepts of the process of creating literature assume that the written version of a text must come first, and that the performance, usually the reading, comes afterwards. See, for example, Halton and Sword, 2018, quote, It could be argued that Enḥeduana herself both pressed the stylus on the clay and composed the text, even though there is no clear evidence to prove this." Unquote. The ancient practice and its concept are different. Rituals are meant for performance. Their process of creation is in ancient times inseparable from the performance. It is therefore very different from the creation of texts in modern times. We find an account of the creation process of such ritual song in the Song of Praise to Nintu and Kesh. Enlil sings his song of praise, thereby performing the activation ritual for the temple. And while he is singing, the text is written down by Nisapa. As the sacred song Ninmeshara is a ritual text, it is primarily intended for performance, not for reading. The song itself even addresses its own performance. The divine high priestess creates it and performs it. The cult singers will repeat it. The addressee of the performance is the goddess Inanna herself, not a human audience. The function of the transcription is not to present a text for a reading audience, nor a text for scholars. The function of the transcription is to ensure that later cult singers can reproduce the wording as faithfully as possible during their cultic performance. The oral recital of the cult song is the primary act of its creation, the writing the secondary. This is consistent with the practice as we find it in another source or in other sources, as in the Kesh hymn or, for example, the royal hymn Shulgi-i. Only here in Shulgi-i, the relevant passage is quite often not translated correctly. For a correct translation, see Maywald 2021. We come now to the priority of performance in perspective of meaning. The performance of the ritual is most important. It is crucial because its addressee is the goddess Inanna. The ritual with its song must be perfect in order to interact with Inanna, to convince her of one's intentions. Even more, the ritual is of evocative quality in order to fill Inanna with greater power. The ritual song is a gift for Inanna, precious like fine beer. See line 82. It is a gift because it praises Inanna's rise to power. The song not only observes this ascent, it evokes it. And when Inanna will have shown that she is indeed the most powerful of the gods, the song will continue to contribute to it and ensure that she remains the most powerful. For this reason, the ritual is not to be performed only once, but the cult singers are to repeat it later on. It can only be continued as part of the regular cult when the bad, dark situation, in the words of Ninmeshara, the middle of the night, has changed for the better. That is, when Inanna has actually appeared and acted as the most powerful goddess. Then it will be a kind of lasting gift to her. Enḥeduana is concerned with the constant performance of this ritual and only with the ritual. The process of writing it down is subordinate. No words are used on that. Of course, there are enough scribes among Enḥeduana's subordinates, as evidenced by a cylinder seal, who will take care of it. As in Shulgi-i, the performance of the ritual takes precedence. Writing is secondary and not even in view here. this result, the contextualization of the song šara as part of a ritual has further important consequences for the question of the emergence of literature and authorship. There is no human audience in view. The addressee is the goddess Inanna. The speaker is also divine. Enḥeduana created this song in her manifestation of the goddess Ningal. This means that a later revision of the text is not necessary and would even be dangerous, for the words spoken by one goddess to another must be transmitted as accurately as possible. This explains why the wording of the various tablets and fragments of šara differ only slightly. Scientific conclusion on an ancient phenomenon. From an emic perspective, the statements that seem to refer to authorship are in fact not statements about authorship at all. In fact, they are statements about high priesthood and divinity. There are people in the 23rd century who want to deprive Enḥeduana of the office of high priestess. These people have no problem with the idea that a high priestess could create and perform a ritual. Who else should do it? Only the other way around. Knowing that the high priestess has the power and even the duty to create rituals, they urgently try to stop her by all means, with threats of death, expulsion, and banishment. The three lines that, taken together, form the Sphragis are in fact not about authorship, but are Enḥeduana's claim for her priesthood. With this claim, Enḥeduana defends herself against the attempt to remove her from her powerful office. She is still high priestess and therefore able and entitled to compose this and other rituals. From a, as I would say now, outdated point of view, a modern point of view, the situation was assessed almost the other way around. The claim to the priesthood has not been questioned at all in research. What has been questioned is another claim, namely the claim of authorship. But that in turn cannot have been a point of contention for the ancients. The fact that one might have a problem with this is not even considered. Just as a note, if that were important, the Sphragis would look different. Then it would say that it was Enḥeduana who created the song. But the text does not say that. Instead, it says that Enḥeduana is still high priestess, and it is only at a completely different place in the text that one finds the statement, "I created the song." This is a solid basis for a new, more accurate scientific assessment of the matter. If the creation of the song was unproblematic for Enḥeduana's contemporaries, more so, if they thought that only such a high priestess or priest could create such ritual songs, then the attribution of the song to Enḥeduana is also unproblematic for us. Since the fact that Enḥeduana and her time do not care at all about authorship in our sense makes it unsuspicious that such authorship by Enḥeduana actually existed. Therefore, we can conclude, as sure as historians can be, we can confirm the fact that Enḥeduana was indeed the author of the ancient song šara. And we have found that this question was not so important for the ancients, since it was a fact for them that only priests, priestesses in high positions, acting as gods, as manifestation of a deity, created ritual songs. Ancient Perspective Part 3. Gods and the Truth. There is one further aspect, given here as kind of a bonus point. Evaluating the content of Ninmishara with its enactment of Inanna as the most terrible and dangerous destroyer of her enemies, one has to reflect of the function and the possibility to make use of such a song. Who would dare to perform or to write a ritual song urging Inanna to act as a horrible fighting machine and, at the same time, not meaning it seriously? Who would dare to perform or write a ritual song to this most powerful goddess, enchanting her wrath, which might only stop after having devoured even the corpses of her enemies, identifying oneself with the high priestess Enḥeduana, but being another person? In other words, who would dare to tell lies to the most powerful martial goddess of ancient Mesopotamia? If we think about our basic knowledge about life in ancient Mesopotamia, the answer is clear. No one. Death of the author god, birth of God as author. An outlook in conclusion. Roland Barthes' death of the author god is even more true in Mesopotamia than Barthes could imagine. For Barthes, the author must die so that the reader can be born. In Mesopotamia, the priestess as human must die in the sense that she must step back or withdraw so that the god as author can be born. To use the wording of Barthes, the author god must die so that the god can be born as author. Summary of the results. Authorship and literature. Methodologically, it is important to start with philological groundwork and careful reading of the sources. And what is equally important, our premises must be consistent with the evidence of other sources from the same cultural context. It would be anachronistic to simply transfer our own categories, reading habits and worldviews, which we take for granted as people of the 21st century AC, to ancient sources 4,000 years removed from us. We must carefully reconstruct the cultural background. And we have to disclose on which basic assumptions we build our conclusions and how we can prove them. In ancient perspective, the song Ninmishara is a ritual song, is part of a ritual. Only gods possess rituals. And it is the main message of Ninmishara that Inanna possesses all rituals and that she will use them, especially the martial ones. And only gods create rituals. The text Ninmishara emphasizes that Enḥeduana is still high priestess even if other contemporaries deny it. As a high priestess, Enḥeduana is a manifestation of the goddess Ningal, and as manifestation of the goddess Ningal, Enḥeduana is authorized to create the ritual song Ninmishara. There is no simple Sphragis that indicates authorship in Ninmishara. Only the addition of several statements has the effect of a Sphragis. This complex Sphragis is not about authorship at all, but about high priesthood. So it is precisely this differently functioning complex Sphragis that makes it unsuspicious for authorial research. The fact that people of her time disputed whether she had the right to create the ritual implies that they took it for granted that she did create it. This makes it clear that in Etic perspective, Enḥeduana is indeed to be regarded as an author, namely as the earliest literary author known by name in world literature. The ritual song is not intended for a human audience. The communication situation is as follows. The addressee of the ritual song is the goddess Inanna. The speaker is Enḥeduana as manifestation of the goddess Ningal. As a result of a divine action, the song must be transmitted as precisely as possible. In the ritual song, there is a promise that the performance of the ritual will continue. To this end, cult singers are mentioned to repeat the song. In contrast, it is obviously not of the same importance that the song is written down. Unlike the cult singers, scribes are not mentioned at all. Here in šara, literature is created within the framework of the cult. One strives for the highest art because the best is just good enough as gift for the highest personalities, the gods. As a metaphor for the excellent quality of the song, Enḥeduana therefore chooses fine beer. Sumerians and Akkadians love beer. Literature here arises from communication with the deity. The gift for the goddess must be as excellent as the libations, so that the goddess accepts it and acts in return as the priestess wishes. Life and limb depend on it. The result of this analysis is a higher degree of plausibility for the actual authorship of Enḥeduana than in the case of šara is hardly possible within the historical sciences. In modern ethic perspective, šara is of high poetic and rhetorical quality, so that we would undoubtedly count it as world literature. For us, šara is a piece of literature. Therefore, the author of the song is to be considered for us as the first literary author in the world known by name. From a Mesopotamian point of view, the song šara is a sacred ritual song. Its quality is high because of its ritual value. In other words, because it is perfectly suited to enable the best possible communication with the most powerful goddess in the most difficult situation. Enḥeduana and her contemporaries concluded that the ritual was perfect, since the civil war ended as Enḥeduana had hoped. In her time, this was interpreted as evidence that the ritual had been effective. For them, it had worked out. Enḥeduana was the author of the whole ritual. Only as manifestation of a goddess she was allowed and able to create such a powerful ritual. Authorship results here from divinity. The results for šara are interesting in themselves, and they can serve as a case study for general research on literature and authorship in ancient Mesopotamia. The research on šara, as well as the study on the Kish temple hymn and others, opens a new way to study literature from a more original perspective. In ancient Mesopotamia of the 3rd and beginning of the 2nd millennium, there is an awareness that creative efforts to compose words into a poetic and rhetorically fine text, what we would call a literary text, are important. However, the main goal of this creative activity is not the creation of literature, but the creation of religious rituals. The aim is to communicate and interact with the gods as perfectly as possible. This is a subject that deserves further in-depth study. For now, suffice it to say that these findings can be fitted together like pieces of a puzzle to form a larger picture. That the first literature in ancient Mesopotamia, the first world literature besides the Egyptian one, emerged from the context of cult.